So good evening and welcome to Glasgow Loves the U. And this evening we have a very special episode because here at Glasgow Loves the U, we want to do something about the situation in Ukraine because we're really concerned about the situation there. So we thought that what we could do is provide a platform to the Ukrainians and to help them get their message across. So this evening we're joined by Dr. Anna McKeever. Dr. Anna McKeever is a lecturer in the School of Education and Social Sciences at the University of West of Scotland. She's completed a Bachelor of Arts from the National University of Kiev, and she received her a PhD in Political Science from the University of Ulster in 2018. Dr. McKeever holds 2 research-focused masters, one from Central European University and one from the University of Lausanne, and she speaks 4 languages. She has recently written a book entitled Immigration Policy and Right-Wing Populism in Western Europe. So welcome, Anna. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and we've got Bernd helping with the IT side, and then we've got Jenny who will be keeping an eye on your questions coming in through social media, so Twitter and Facebook. So if we could just ask if you could keep them polite and respectful this evening, thanks very much. So the first question, so if you could tell us about your career so far and how you ended up in Glasgow.
So basically, as you've already mentioned, Jenny, I came to the UK to do my PhD in 2014, and it was in the University of Ulster. And I knew I wanted an academic career, so I liked the UK and I wanted to stay here. So I worked some jobs in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. So they were like temporary jobs in academia. But eventually I managed to secure a permanent job here in the University of West of Scotland a few years ago in the School of Education and Social Sciences. So that's how I ended up in Glasgow. Basically, I moved here for the job, but I always wanted, to be in the UK, and I wanted to pursue my career in the UK. So when the opportunity, came along, I was very happy to, take it. And for last 2 years, I've been working in the University of the West of Scotland as a lecturer in political science.
Mm-hmm. And how did you become interested in politics?
So it was a long time ago. So in school, I basically we didn't have politics as a subject, but we had history, which was kind of very close to politics. So, and then, I always knew that I either liked politics or law. And my decision was, to pursue a degree in politics in Kiev in the university. And as I wanted to have a career in academia, I went to do a master's in Central European Universities. It was in political science, and then later in Switzerland, in Lausanne. So politics kind of always fascinated me, but what is interesting actually, I am more like a specialist in politics of the UK and France rather than Ukraine, rather than my own country. So my interest is in political parties and immigration policy making in those countries. But of course, with the recent events that have been happening in Ukraine, I'm more than willing to share, my views on what is happening. And I think it is really important that, other people in the world know basically what is it like to share firsthand experience of my family, suffering from the war in Ukraine now. So politics has always been, a big part of my life. And now more than ever with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, so I'm happy to share my opinion on that.
Okay, and we're really grateful to you for talking to us this evening. Just for the sake of our viewers, could you give us maybe just a quick summary of the recent history in Ukraine, just some key points?
I won't go too much back in history, but I think I'll highlight some of the major events that, kind of triggered what is happening right now in Ukraine with the Russian invasion. So in 2014, in the end of 2013, we had a pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who didn't want to sign an accession treaty with the European Union. and he wanted to enter into the customs union with the Russian Federation. So people didn't want this. People wanted Ukraine to join or the European Union. So they didn't want closer ties with Russia. And originally the protest started in the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014. And originally they were peaceful, but then a lot of people were detained, and there was the protest turned violent because the riot police were suppressing the protests. So there was a lot of kind of fighting between the armed police, special forces, and the protesters, and they were shooting. They were shooting unarmed civilians. And that all resulted in the president fleeing the country, and it resulted in the fact that the government, the pro-Russian government that we had at that time, was overthrown. And then we had a pro-European president, Petro Poroshenko. So he wanted to maintain close connections to the European Union, and he wanted Ukraine in the future to become part of the European Union. And in 2014, whenever we had this, part of our history that was, when Ukraine was at one of its weakest points, Putin decided to take advantage of the situation and annex Crimean Peninsula. So first he kind of the men started to occupy key facilities in the in Crimean Peninsula. So first he denied that they were Russian soldiers because there was no identification who they belonged to. So eventually, in a few weeks, they completely occupied the Russian peninsula, and the pro-Russian government was imposed on that part of Ukraine. And they held an illegal referendum in 2014, where basically people had two options: either to join Russia or to return to 1992 constitution that offered Crimea quite a lot of sovereignty. So there was no option for residents of Crimea whether they wanted to be part of Ukraine. Anyway, to cut the long story short, the referendum was held illegally, and they said that there was a high voter turnout, and 97% of the population voted to support joining Russia. 97% of the Crimean population voted to support joining Russia, which later on, after the report, was considered completely false, because it was estimated that only 30% of the residents of Crimea actually took part in that referendum, and only half of them wanted to join Russia. So we could, the annexation of Crimea wasn't legal, and no Western democratic state has recognized that. So basically, after Crimea, they started, the pro-Russian separatists started to infiltrate the Donbas region of Ukraine. So that's the eastern part of Ukraine, Lugansk and Donetsk, particularly these cities. So Russia started to finance pro-separatist, position in those regions. And of course, Ukraine couldn't just stand and watch Russia taking part of Ukraine without just stand and watch them doing that. But at the same time, Ukraine also didn't want to fire first, because we didn't want to, then be blamed for the fact that, we used the weapons against the peaceful population. And then the conflict started in the east, where the so-called anti-terrorist operation was started by the Ukrainian government. And the conflict has been ongoing, because since 2014, basically a lot of people has fled Donbas region in Ukraine, because obviously there was fighting there. And Russian Federation was just financing pro-Russian separatists in that region. And right now, was only a few weeks ago, or like 2 weeks ago, the Russian president decided to recognize those quasi entities, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, and therefore to start denazification of Ukraine. So basically, that's just like a kind of short summary of, how we ended up here, is that after Crimea, the situation, Russia wanted to take part of the eastern of Ukraine, but Ukraine couldn't stand and, watch that happening. And then eventually, when the Russian president has recognized those two quasi entities, Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, and he presented this as a legitimation to start the invasion of Ukraine, and that's where we are now. So he is claiming that he is protecting the population of these republics and wider Russian-speaking population in Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, it's a horrifying situation. There's obviously a lot of information warfare, disinformation being sent out there. And so, say before now, how were relations between the Russians in the Ukraine and say Ukrainians living in Russia? Was there always that tension there?
So as obviously most of you know that Ukraine has a large proportion of, Russians, particularly Crimea, and eastern parts of Ukraine also have a lot of population that speaks Russian. And relations before, before the start of this war or before 2014 were absolutely fine. So we have two languages that are spoken in Ukraine, Russian and Ukrainian. So Ukrainian is the official one, but there has been, no problems with Russian-speaking Ukrainians. So President Putin, he claimed that he's trying to protect the rights of Russian-speaking population that are being infringed upon, which is absolutely not true, because they're Russian schools, they're Russian-speaking schools. People speak that language. Nobody is saying anything if you speak it. I originally was born in Zaporizhia, which is mostly Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, and I went to a Russian school in my first year. So there's absolutely no kind of limitation of the rights of Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. So the relations were fine. It's just a pretense kind of to start the invasion of an independent and sovereign and peaceful country. And a lot of Russian-speaking people who I know who fled Donbass, some are my friends, they said that it was absolutely okay before 2014 started, and they were forced to flee their homes because supposedly their language rights were not respected, but which is absolutely not true.
Right. So all these stories about, the oppression of the Russian speakers, just entirely fabricated, just as a kind of pretext to war.
Yes, it was used as a pretext for President Putin to basically invade an independent, peaceful, and sovereign nation. Because, as I said, I have a first-hand experience, having lived, and I was born in the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, in Zaporizhia, and like my family only spoke Russian for maybe until 2014, and then they made a conscious choice to switch to Ukrainian. But there has been no infringement of the rights of the Russian population, and there are Russian schools and people speak Russian, and nothing bad happens. So it is absolutely just a pretense for the president of Russian Federation to start the invasion of a sovereign country.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what to say to that. Just see if there's any questions coming in from social media.
There's not particularly any questions. I suppose I would have maybe asked, Ukraine seems to have been quite exposed, like the fact that it wasn't in NATO and wasn't in the EU, and would you say that was the case? And
sorry, can you repeat?
Well, we're just really learning more about it. I feel bad we didn't know enough about it, but they seem to have been quite exposed by not have been part of NATO, not have been part of the EU. They've been a bit left on their own, really.
Yeah, and I think now what we see is happening is that because we're not part of NATO and we're not part of the European Union, especially that we're not part of NATO, we're not getting the support from the West that we need, because basically the NATO has already said that they are not going to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine because it will mean that NATO will be directly involved in a war with Russia, which NATO, of course, doesn't want to happen. So yeah, I could say that we are more or less left on our own to fight this bloody war, and we're grateful. Don't get me wrong, we're grateful for the financial assistance that European Union and NATO are sending us. Over the last, since the war started. But I think when we're talking about, for example, the fighter jets and more kind of direct provision of, military equipment, the response from the European Union and the NATO has been really slow because, yeah, it's good. We're grateful for the financial assistance, but what about the actually, providing us with fighter jets? Because they're only talking about it now. The United States is trying to renegotiate it with Poland because Poland currently doesn't want to allow basically the passing of fighter jets through its territory on the way to Ukraine. So now we're in day 10 of the war. So it has been a very slow response in terms of getting the military, assistance we require to protect ourselves. We understand that NATO is not going to impose a no-fly zone. It's very, very unlikely. But at least in terms of getting military assistance, the response should have been much more quick, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I believe there are two more questions.
Yeah, there's one about the refugees, just that this very small number that Britain has taken so far. When somebody has commented, Lucas has commented, when today's Britons are asked by their grandchildren what they did in the Great Ukrainian War, they will proudly reply that at least we kept Ukrainian women and children out. Yeah, so just really comment about refugees.
From Ukraine, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely appalling that UK is not opening borders to refugees, to Ukrainian refugees and other refugees, when we're talking about Syria and Afghanistan. But if we're discussing the current war with Russia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, so as of yesterday, only 50 visas, as I'm sure you're all aware, have been granted to Ukrainian refugees, while Poland has taken over 1 million of refugees. Romania and Hungary and Slovakia, they have received also a substantial number of refugees coming to those countries. And today, Prime Minister said that UK is not going to have an open border policy as the European Union does, because there are different legal implications. So what he said was basically that Ukrainians were allowed to the European, to travel to the European Union anyway without visas, and this is correct. Since 2014 or 2015, we do not require visas for travel, but we did require visas for Ireland, for example, and we could see an example of a small country like Ireland opening their borders to us and waiving all the visas is absolutely exceptional, and heartwarming. So I do not understand why the UK government cannot, bigger country, UK is a bigger country, why the United Kingdom government cannot take an example of Ireland and demonstrate its commitment to protecting people who are fleeing war, because I think the government confuses, refugees with economic migrants, and they think that there's nothing wrong with economic migration. I'm an economic migrant myself, but I think there is the confusion of the narrative of basically that refugees are economic migrants, because no, they are people who are fleeing the war, and my family, they do not want to stay in the UK indefinitely. They want to go back as soon as it is safe. And currently, under the current rules, they're not allowed to come here, even though I'm legally resident here, but just I don't have the indefinite leave to remain. And this is absolutely appalling that my family is stranded and they can't join me here in safety. And the 50 visas were granted. So, so yeah, I think the UK needs to do more in terms of the protection of refugees. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And just in terms of the British government, do you think that from your perspective that the British government has a kind of diminished role in international relations in general? It's like since Brexit that maybe in a way they're being left out of the major decisions in terms of this war.
Well, I think that, of course, Brexit had an impact on the, international role of the UK. But if we're talking specifically about this war, UK still has a very strong presence in NATO. UK has strong presence in G7 and in general, I think when we think about diplomacy, obviously UK understands and Europe understands that, we need to find the common enemy, Russian President, Mr. Putin. And I think that in that case, there'd be the European Union and UK would cooperate, and the United States, obviously, they are cooperating, they're sharing intelligence. So I think when it comes to, a military conflict like that, nobody's going to turn away the UK government because Brexit happened. But basically, UK still has a strong presence in NATO and G7. And I think when it comes to the war, we can't really talk about the diminishing role because they understand that they are fighting that they're resisting the common kind of enemy. So they will join, their efforts when it comes to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that that Russia maybe has too much of an influence over Westminster? So, for example, a few months ago, we interviewed Peter Gagan, and he spoke about the Russian oligarchs' money that's kind of washing around London. What's your view on that?
Well, yeah, they call London like Londongrad, which is partly true because there's a lot of rich Russians and a lot of money from Russian oligarchs that are there, and UK government is by imposing sanctions, of course, is sending the right message. And I don't know exactly the figures, that we're talking about, but a lot of money, obviously, that are, located in London, and the money that is owned by Russian oligarchs in different kind of formats. But I think in terms of the sum of the sanctions, the UK government has been a bit lenient. So I read some stories that basically UK government allows gives Russian oligarchs some time basically to take their money out. So while they're doing the sanctions, while they're imposing the sanctions and sending the right message to Russian oligarchs and Russian elites who have money in London, they are also letting them kind of take their money out before the sanctions go full force. So I think that they should have been a bit less lenient in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just wondering if there's any more questions then on Facebook.
There's one on Twitter from Steve just saying, is this Russia's Suez moment, plotting to invade a peaceful state and earning condemnation, maybe loss of international standing?
Yes, so thank you, Stephen. So definitely, it is a direct, invasion of a peaceful and sovereign country, and it's a direct violation of Budapest 1994 memorandum, which basically that's when Ukraine denuclearized itself and gave up its nuclear weapons in an exchange to the assurances from the United Kingdom, the US and Russia to maintain its sovereignty and to maintain its sovereignty and territorial integrity. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is a direct violation of Budapest memorandum, and this is becoming problematic because, of course, the US and UK, gave assurances to Ukraine that, in case the sovereignty and the integrity of our country is going to be violated, there'll be some response. But they were just, they were assurances, they were not guarantees. So by assurances, it meant that they will, in any case, not send, directly military troops to Ukraine. The assurances meant that they'll try to do something, but as we see now, I do not think that, they're doing enough, because what is happening is that civilians who are in Ukraine, who are directly now, who are direct victims of the shelling attacks coming from, Russian Federation, they are left. Basically, Ukraine is left to fight on their own, and I think that the response from the US and NATO should have been stronger in terms of providing military assistance much quicker. And Russia, of course, it's not the first time when Russia directly violated Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. It happened in 2014, but basically. It feels like we are left to fight on our own, and I wonder how many more civilian lives need to be lost in order for more sanctions to be imposed, in order for UK and European Union and US to think about embargo on Russian oil and gas. European Union is going to have a summit tomorrow to discuss the ways to diversify dependence, basically to diversify means to get oil and gas and to stop dependence on Russian oil and gas. But I think that, that it's been, the response has been slow, because we're not just talking about the fact that we have been invaded as a sovereign state, but we're talking about the civilian lives, people who are trapped, people who are being shelled and killed every day, and how much more will it take for for the world to actually do something more about it, to stop this this bloody war.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking there about civilians being killed, and obviously we've seen lots of evidence the last week of, war crimes being committed and crimes against humanity, the crime of aggression, obviously, and, civilians being targeted in maternity hospitals. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And there's a lot of talk about a special tribunal. So, for example, Gordon Brown was on the television this morning calling for a special tribunal, but obviously the International Criminal Court is there and it's established, and that's their main purpose, is to investigate these type of crimes. So what's your opinion on whether there should be a special tribunal?
My opinion is that, of course, there should be a special tribunal. And as you've mentioned, right, Jenny, is that today I've seen in the news that they've already started the hearings. Of course, there should be a special tribunal, because we're talking about civilians who are the victims of that. And my family personally have been hiding in subway in Kiev for, for days, for almost a week, because they were not able, to leave the subway, because Kiev was being shelled along with other cities in Ukraine. The problem is that Russian military is not able to take Ukraine on the ground. So they're getting frustrated, and that's why, this shelling continues nonstop, and the complete destruction, which leads to the loss of human lives, to the loss, they're shelling everything. They don't think whether it's children or women, whether it's animals, whatever, and they're not letting people evacuate, which is most important. So there are these talks that they're saying that we're going to organize humanitarian corridors, green corridors, for people to exit the occupied cities that have been without electricity, food and water and heating. But it's been now said so many times that the evacuations have been halted because Russian military continues to bomb and shell, shell civilians. So of course there should be a tribunal, and there's a lot of evidence that this is happening and it's been documented. And I think, those who have given those orders to shell innocent people and to destroy everything, they should be held to account. Yeah, through the
Yeah.
international tribunals. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then we've seen today that Russia are offering you know, humanitarian corridors, but the corridors go straight to Russia, which is obviously, you know, obscene.
And yeah, and people, if I'm sure everybody has seen it on the news and on Twitter, that when the cities that have been captured by Russian military, right, that they face so much resistance from the Ukrainian population, that unarmed civilians are trying to stop the tanks, unarmed civilians are talking to Russian military with Kalashnikovs, and they're going, you know, to the main squares with flags, so they're resistant. So there's a clear indication that nobody wants, you know, and these are cities that are predominantly Russian speaking, some of them like Kharkiv, for example, you know, and Kherson, there's a big proportion of the population who speaks Russian there. So these are cities that are supposedly being, you know, defended by the Russian military, but people do not want to, they do not want to join Russia. They don't want Russian military on our territory. And we see that there is a big, so people are not scared. The unarmed civilians are resisting Russian military, they are resisting Russian soldiers with Kalashnikovs. So clearly, as you pointed right, you know, the humanitarian corridors, yeah, nobody wants to go to Russia, because it's just a nightmare of what is happening in those cities that have been occupied, where people are stranded without food, water, electricity, and heating, and they're constantly being shelled. So they need to be in like underground to get some safety from what's happening. So Russia is not even respecting, you know, the Russian government is not even respecting the promise that they've made to evacuate those civilians out of those cities that have been completely occupied.
Yeah, it's just so shocking, such a horrific situation. Yeah. Is there any more questions coming in?
There's certainly a comment that you know, about the stopping the Russian oil and gas imports and things. But there's one from Bill Roger. We hear Ukrainian politicians in Ukraine regularly calling for the imposition of a no-fly zone. Do Ukrainians living in the UK generally appreciate why NATO is ruling that out?
Well, I can't speak of, I can't speak on the behalf of the British population or population here in the UK, but I've mentioned that earlier, that NATO has been very clear that, yes, while we're, begging NATO and the United States to impose a no-fly zone because innocent civilians are being killed, NATO has been pretty clear that they are not going to do that, because it will mean direct involvement in the war with Russia, and they don't want to do that because it might lead to a nuclear war. And so the implications of a no-fly zone is very bad for Ukraine, because as I said, Russian military can't take us on the ground, so they are trying to shell Ukrainians, and they're trying to shell cities, everything that they can. But I think the best what we could hope for is to get military jets and military equipment provided by NATO and the European Union in order to fight Russian military. But no-fly zone. I even think, even if people in the UK would have supported it, I think it's not only about people in the UK, it's about people in other countries, it's about governments, because they are making those decisions. But direct implication is that if a no-fly zone is imposed and NATO gets involved, it's going to be a direct involvement with in this war with Russia, and that might turn out bad. But unfortunately, I don't know how else we can plead to get help from the international community, because our capacity, we can't fight fourth biggest army in the world alone. We can't, after China, Russia, and India, after US, China, and India, I think Russia is the fourth largest army. So, and Ukraine is much smaller. So we do need military support as soon as possible, but no-fly zone, I don't think that this will happen.
And so speaking of support, I just have one final question. Are you getting enough support here in Scotland? And I'm sure there are so many people in Scotland really want to help. So like, how can we help, like in a practical sense?
So there has been a lot of support, you know, both from, so my work has been very supportive of, you know, supportive of this, you know, of helping me to survive this personally, because I'm directly involved in that, but also wider, you know, Scottish community here in Glasgow. So I've been volunteering with, you know, some organizations that are preparing humanitarian aid for Ukraine. So there has been a lot of support coming from ordinary people here, and it's been absolutely heartwarming. And everybody I've spoken to, we don't even have enough people to sort all that, all those donations that are coming through, that are being sent to Ukraine or to bordering countries with Ukraine where refugees are going now. But I can share after the call with you, like there's a link with different, you know, websites. So if maybe somebody wants to support the military, or if somebody doesn't want to support the military but wants to support, you know, other things, so I can share that link with you after the call. But I think what we need is the pressure that ordinary UK citizens put on the UK government to accept, you know, to waive visas and accept Ukrainian refugees now, because I think that's a big thing that, you know, the wider UK public can do to help Ukraine, because as I said, my personal experience, and I'm sure there are other, you know, people like me in the same situation who can't bring their families here still, and it's absolutely appalling. So writing to your MPs would be, you know, one of the ways to put pressure on the current government to change the situation, at least so, you know, more Ukrainians are able to reunite with their families. And in general, you know, just that UK accepts more refugees, even if they do not have a connection to the UK, any family connection. Because as I said, majority of people do not want, you know, to come to other countries and live there indefinitely. They want to go back and rebuild the country, and they want to go back because all their life is there. They, you know, they're absolutely traumatized by what is happening, and UK needs to play its part in offering a temporary, you know, protection for them. So I think writing to your MPs, I urge everyone who cares about, you know, the situation and who wants to help. So that way is you can guys put pressure on the government to liberalize the policy in terms of accepting more refugees to the UK.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We're so grateful for you to come and to speak to us this evening, you know, especially at such a difficult time. And, you know, we wish you and your family all the very best. And, you know, our hearts just go out to all the people of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm really happy that you offered this platform for me to voice, you know, the concerns that Ukraine has been facing now, and that, you know, people in Ukraine, civilians and those who are fleeing the war have been experiencing. So thank you very much for having me.